Because when I was talking to Zach, I think this will work perfectly, personally. I don't think you should have any problem. How does this sound?
Good.
Does this sound good?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
We'll hire you next week to be our speaker. Usually, it's
because he said I shouldn't have let anyone up there, and that's what he told me, so.
This is like the Dodgers in that this is one of the first things in the morning. People wander in. And, it's one of the secrets of champions. Is that people wander. Yeah, yes. Good morning. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me in the choir loft? Some of you may have heard last time I explained how my wife and I moved into senior living place this past year and learned something incredibly powerful. They start every program. If it says in the bulletin 9:15, they start at 9:15 and nothing lasts more than an hour. So we will try to keep to that so that we can wander over to the next program and make it in time. I want to, before we start, Bob Spiritus, would you stand up? I'll tell you why. Bob is the co-leader of the science group and really takes the lead in organizing our speakers. And we've been very happy with the quality of presentations and areas we've covered. If you have somebody who you think would be a wonderful speaker, let Bob or me know and we'll try to line them up. Also, yeah, you can sit down now. So give him speakers and give me, who knows what you should give me? Money to help pay for everything we do. All right, we've been experimenting this year to expand our topics a bit. We've worked for the last 2.5 years with Mark Wentzler and the Climate Change Initiative at Chautauqua, and he has helped us broaden and get more climate and conservation-based speakers. We have always had wonderful speakers, people on the grounds who are health, medical, and science technical experts. And I thought, let's try to get a little broader. So this year, some of you may recall, we had a talk on comedy is your best medicine. And today we're going to be looking at science and sports. And our speaker today, Dr. George Carlo, is a medical professional, has worked for a variety of sports teams, has a business called Secrets of Champions, and is just up to date on a wide range of scientific aspects related to professional sports. He's going to provide an introduction to what he does and the role of science in sports, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions later on Tommy John surgery or the magic of Otani or whatever. But now here's George.
Thank you, Bob. Much appreciated. It's really an honor for me to be here with you all today. You know, taking a guy who spends a lot of time in locker rooms and having him speak in a church is a little risky. I'll do my best to keep everything straight. What I would like to do is give you a little bit of an overview of performance science, how it's evolved over the years, give you some examples of how it works in various sports, and then, as Bob mentioned, answer your questions, because I'd really like to be on topic with what you're most interested in. So we'll go with that plan. Now, the thing that is really sort of unknown to most people is where performance science really came from, because it started in the area in the 1970s where we were looking at environmental factors and disease. That's where this version of sports science came from. It was in the 1970s, you remember the war on cancer. And during those years, 70s and early 80s, I was working at Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo. And it was interesting because everything was focused on what went wrong. What could go wrong based on exposures in the environment. And it was very focused on that. In fact, I remember one course that I was involved in as a student, the cancer epidemiology course. And during the first week, the professor talked about how if you smoke too much, you get lung cancer. And then in the second week, he talked about how if you drink too much, you can get liver cancer. And then in the third week, he talked about how if you had too much sex and you were a guy, you could get prostate cancer, and if you were a woman, you could get cervical cancer. And in the fourth week, the student asked a question, raised a hand, and said, "Look, professor, if I don't smoke and I don't drink and I don't have sex, can you promise me I'll live 100 years?" The professor said, "No, but it will seem like 100 years." Now, the thing is, all of that science, looking at how things went wrong, begged the question, with all this knowledge, how can we make things go right? And that's where performance science came from, the opposite side of the coin of what went wrong with exposures and what could go right with manipulating the environment in a constructive way. Now, the big breakthrough in performance science was the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project that began in 1987. I was lucky enough to be a peer reviewer for that project. It was funded by taxpayer money, $2 billion. And the idea of the Human Genome Project was for us to figure out the human genome so that then through genetic engineering, we would be able to eliminate disease. That was the promise. And there were big companies named, like Genentech and Amgen and those companies that were behind the Human Genome Project, as well as the government. Now, the working hypothesis of the Human Genome Project was, number one, humans, top of the food chain, got to have more genes than other species. In our arrogance, we thought that. So number one, humans, more genes than other species. And number two, the estimate was, in 1987, was there would be between 300,000 and 1 million human genes. Now what happened is when the first data came out in the early 90s, there were some surprises. The first surprise was that there were not 300,000 to 1 million human genes. There were 25,000 human genes. And the fruit fly, which was the animal used to figure it all out, had 27,500 genes. So on both instances, the investigators were surprised and they were perhaps wrong. So they go back to the data and do some reanalyses, and then they come back and they say, okay, we had a couple of things that weren't exactly accurate. It's true that there are only 25,000 human genes. And it's also true that the fruit fly has more than the human. However, there are several thousand things that are on cell membranes that are called tubulin receptors. And the job of those things on cell membranes is to switch the genes in the nucleus on and off. So in other words, the environment had an impact on which genes would be switched on and off. And this became the basis of our understanding for everything that we learn. And that was called epigenetic triggering, epigenetic engineering. And if you think about a couple of examples, like when you were young, like a child, and you're going to have a two-wheel bicycle, and you have to learn how to balance on the two-wheel bicycle. And back in those days, they had training wheels, and maybe your parents were there holding you and whatever, and you fell down a few times, and that happened. But once you were able to balance on the two-wheel bicycle, you're able to balance forever. That's called an epigenetic trigger. So that the genes that were allowing you to balance were actually being switched on. That's just a simple example, and actually they use that in the Human Genome Project as a way of trying to explain how important this epigenetic triggering was. So as we go forward in the performance science area, everything started to focus on epigenetic triggering and epigenetic induction. So that's what teaching in the sports world, teaching skills, teaching sustainability, teaching readiness, all of that was based on epigenetic science. Now, back in those days, another thing that was going on was a huge database being put together for performance. And the huge database had both special operations soldiers and high-level athletes in the database. Men, women, people playing different sports, people doing different things in the military. And the idea was to put a database together that could be studied to figure out the most efficient way of using epigenetic triggering for performance. And that database, by 1993, had some 20,000 people in the database. And the idea was, now we have to analyze what's in there. Let's figure this out. And the first pass at the data, I was in the middle of this a little bit. The first pass at the data was, back in those days, we could not do the things with computers that we can do today on your phone. So that the idea of a large database with multiple variables on each person in the database was a real challenge. So the first step was to see if we could cut the database down in such a way that we'd be able to then do reasonable analyses. So the first pass at the cut was, let's look at the people in the database, men, women, athletes, soldiers, who were in the top 5% of what they did for 5 years. We'll call that sustained excellence. Top 5% of what they did for 5 years. Go into the database, apply that filter. We thought that would cut that database in half. So we'd go from 20,000 maybe down to 10,000, and then maybe some other filters to lower it down to reasonable numbers. We were surprised. Less than 1% of the people in that database could meet those criteria, the top 5% of what they did for 5 years. Now keep in mind, in that database were the best of the best. We even had in there the dream team, the basketball team from 1992. Remember the Olympic team, the dream team? They were in that database too. So here we had less than 1% of the people could meet that criteria. Now that was a big surprise. And what we ended up doing was saying, well, it sets up a natural experiment for us. Let's look at that 1% versus the other 99%. So that was the first analysis that was done. By the way, you know, as an aside, that 1%, like of all the people who have played baseball in major leagues, 1% are in a Hall of Fame. Same thing holds true for football and basketball. So that 1%, even though we thought it was such a big surprise, actually has played out to be a reasonable number. Okay, the experiment, the 1%ers versus the other 99%. In looking at all the data, and there were data on biomarkers, nerve conduction velocity, psychological factors, other, mental factors, family history, all of that stuff, 3 things jumped out of the database that were determinative of that 1%. The first thing was what we term situational awareness. Those 1%ers were able to see the game big, see the battlefield big. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the person next to them was supposed to be doing. They knew what the other side was trying to do to them. 360-degree situational awareness, big picture awareness. That was number 1. The second thing that jumped out was that they were able to feel the right move at the right time and trust what they feel. Feel the right move at the right time and trust what they feel. They had a trust in their instincts. They were able to feel the right move at the right time and trust what they feel. Number 3, no fear of failure. These people who are in the 1%, in their minds, they either won or they learned, but never were they swimming upstream. Never would they allow the idea of a loss to enter into their thinking or their being. No fear of failure, either win or learn. Now, those 3 things, from a neurophysiological point of view, are what we would term in the category of adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity. Ability to adapt in real time with confidence, if you will. And it turns out that from a neurophysiological point of view, adaptive capacity is a function of the autonomic nervous system. It's a function of the nervous system that does not involve us thinking. And the autonomic nervous system has 3 components. One component is what's called the enteric nervous system. That's the thing that handles digestion and those things. We don't have to think about that. Our body just does it. There's also something called the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our anticipation nervous system. In terms of sports performance, the parasympathetic nervous system is our trying to win nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system is our trying not to lose nervous system. So what we started to see was that the autonomic nervous system was the key for adaptive capacity, and adaptive capacity was the key to what made those 1%ers the 1%ers. So we started to get into this a little bit more, doing some evaluations, figuring out how we could identify adaptive capacity in individual players and individual athletes, and then see what the optimal ratios of parasympathetic to sympathetic functioning would be. And we ended up being able to do that through questionnaires that allowed us to look at present adaptive capacity. And over a period of years, and really smart people who are involved in this, winnowing down the data, we were able to identify 5 domains that were key to adaptive capacity that we could test for, and then, through processes with athletes and soldiers, enhance their adaptive capacity to get them to an optimal place. The 5 domains were these. The first was brain dominance, functional brain dominance. You've all heard about left brain, right brain functions and all that stuff. The left brain function is more of the logical, analytical. The right brain function is the anticipation part of the brain. And it turns out that in the 1%ers and in the people who we were studying, it turned out that the optimal brain dominance was more right brain than left brain, was more anticipatory and being able to adapt than analytical and getting caught up in the past, for example. So brain dominance was the first one. The second one was the nature of the mind-body connection. Was the mind-body connection based on vision, or was it based on feel? And it turns out that the optimal was for the mind-body connection to be based about 80% on feel as opposed to vision. 80% feel as opposed to vision. That's number 2. Number 3, the third domain, what we would call our motivational cues. Motivational cues. Are we motivated more by the process that we're involved in or by the outcome? It turns out that the process is parasympathetic, but the outcome is sympathetic. If you're worried about winning or losing, if you're worried about how much money you're making, if you're worried about other successes that are defined, it creates sympathetic stress because you might lose. So that the idea is that more performance or process motivated over outcome motivated enhances adaptive capacity. The fourth domain had to do with what your competitiveness cue was. What your competitiveness cue was. Did you come to the field every day to do what you could do to beat the other team? Or do you come to the field every day to beat what you did yesterday? Do you come to the game every day to get more hits than you had yesterday? Or do you come to beat the other team? It turns out that beating the other team is the parasympathetic, and beating what you did yesterday causes sympathetic stress. Now, if you're, think about it, play it out. If you're always competing with yourself, eventually you're going to get to a point where you can't win anymore. And that creates sympathetic stress. And then the fifth domain had to do with how you process information, how you take information in. And that is in a category where you're looking for either the bottom line or you're looking for what, why, and how. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Boom, boom, boom. If you're a coach and you're dealing with a player, the bottom line guy is just tell me what to do. But the other guy who is looking for what, why, and how, he wants to know, listen, what we're going to do. Look, what we need to do here is throw a change up to this guy because he's a home run hitter and he's anticipating a fastball, and here's how we're going to do it. So the idea is to stay in your suit. Because if you're a coach, for example, and you're dealing with a bottom line guy giving him a whole bunch of extra information, it causes sympathetic stress. And if you're dealing with a guy who wants the more information, but you're just giving him the bottom line, it causes sympathetic stress. So what we ended up doing was taking these 5 domains, developing questionnaires that allowed us to assess the present adaptive capacity of an individual player or soldier, and then be able to use that information to help us optimize their parasympathetic function and optimize their performance. So that's a history of where this performance science came from. And for the past 20 years or so, we've been working on putting that to work inside the sports world. So that's the sort of the science. That's enough of the science for now. Yes? This button here? Okay.
Here you go.
All righty. So what I want to do is just go through some examples of how we've applied this in different places. Now, this one here is in professional sports. You see a picture of Ken Green, myself, and Peter Costas. And the important thing with this is that van to the right. What we did was we went on first the Golden Bear Tour, which was Jack Nicklaus's tour, and then the PGA Tour with that van. And what we did was we had players come in there, and they'd go through and answer all of the questions. We also did some physical testing, electromyograms and other things to look at what their muscle tension were, and agonist, antagonist interactions, that kind of thing. And we were able to give them, if you will, what we call peak performance pathways that were based on enhancing, things like brain dominance, to move that more into the right brain side, things like nature of the mind-body connection, those types of things. By the way, I just want to tell you a little side story, if you don't mind. We were working on the Golden Bear Tour with Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus, best golfer ever, and I have to say I was nervous as can be. That's Jack Nicklaus. So we were riding around in a round of golf, and he was driving, and I was in the passenger seat on the golf cart. And I'm trying to think of, what does this little guy from Jamestown have to say to Jack Nicklaus? So I said, well, the best thing to do is ask a question. So I asked him a question. I said, Jack, how do you recover from having a bad round of golf? Okay, I asked this to Jack Nicklaus. He slams on the brakes on the cart, slams on the brakes, looks over at me, says, I've never had a bad round. And I'm like, okay. Sorry about that question. But it was one of those things, no fear of failure, all of that. It was right there. Jack Nicklaus was right there. And then as we started talking about the other things, he was right there on everything else. Right there on everything else. Situational awareness. Feel the right move at the right time. He would talk to his caddy about what club to use, how to shape the shot and all that stuff. But the decision was based on his instinct. And that was sort of cool. So anyway, that's an application of it in the golf world. In the professional baseball world, I was with the Detroit Tigers for 14 years as the director of performance for them. And one of the things that we did with the Tigers was look at using timing of nutrition to rebalance circadian and ultradian rhythms. Now, as humans, we operate on 4-hour energy cycles. Those energy cycles are determined by the environment that we're in. The energy cycles are a little bit different in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere, that kind of thing. So the idea is that timing of your nutrition can reset your energy cycles and keep them balanced. And if you want to look deeper, the Nobel Prize in 2017 in physiology and medicine was this exact stuff. So the idea was timing of nutrition. And the timing of nutrition had to do with alternating between chewable nutrition and liquid nutrition. The idea was to optimize the ability to store energy as glycogen in lean muscle. And we had gone through an entire process where timing of nutrition was going to be a key for readiness, recovery, and that type of thing. So during one spring training, I had a whole group of players in a room. We didn't do it in a church, but it was, it was a big room. And and we explained the timing of nutrition stuff. So you wake up at 7 o'clock, at 8:30 you're going to have your chewable breakfast, at 10:30 you're going to have liquid nutrition, at 12:30 you're going to have more chewable nutrition, at 2:30 you're going to have liquid nutrition, then you're ready for the game. After the game, only liquid nutrition, get into deep sleep for repair and recovery. That was the idea. And so that was given to the players. We were in spring training. Now in spring training, all the families come. So they go home and they say, hey, this doctor was talking about timing of nutrition, and they're telling their wives and all that stuff. The wives are like, no. Look, we eat at 4 o'clock. This, and I don't care what the doctor said. It was all that stuff going on. So I set up another meeting, and I bring in the wives and the significant others. And I want to explain to them why we're having the timing of nutrition, why it's so important for their spouses in their professional baseball career and all that stuff. And I'm going through this, and of course they're sitting there, eyes are rolling, and all of that. And then of course, and I'm oblivious. And I say, look, the other thing that happens when you time nutrition like this is that your metabolism resets, and your husbands might lose weight, but don't worry about it. They might lose weight, but that's all part of the metabolic reset. And somebody raises their hand and says, you mean if you do this, you're going to lose weight? And I said, yeah, but don't worry about it. I'm still oblivious, to the questions coming in this direction. And it turns out that the fact that there was a weight management aspect to the timing of nutrition actually got some families actually following it as a unit, which was actually pretty cool. So anyway, so that was one of the anecdotes. Now the other thing I wanted to mention about in the baseball, we did a lot of, and we do a lot of physical testing, and one of the things that we test for is eye dominance. Eye dominance. All of us have maybe one eye or the other eye that is stronger in terms of giving us our vision input than the other. That's called eye dominance. Now, what ends up happening is, let's say that you have your left eye dominant. This one is more dominant than your right eye. What happens is downfield, the focal point from your eyes is going to be shifted where the left eye gives a little bit more, and it will be shifted to the right. And in baseball, for example, for a hitter, that's an important thing. And we did a little bit of analysis, and we found that if you're a right-handed hitter and you're left eye dominant, at 60 feet 6 inches, which is the distance between the pitcher's mound rubber and home plate, for every inch of eye tilt, you misperceive the ball 4 inches off the plate, outside. Okay, so we did some analyses. What's the correction for that? Well, and I worked with the Philadelphia Phillies a little bit, not giving away any secrets here, but the correction for that is to level your eyes and open the stance so that you're able to look square with no tilt at the release point of the ball. And that's one of the things that's a correction for a physiologic characteristic, which is left eye dominance. If you're a right-handed hitter, and the same, if you're a left-handed hitter and your right eye dominance, the same thing happens. So you know, we went into the data nerd area like every day, trying to figure out different things that could be helpful to the players. Now, another thing, we worked with the people at the University of Buffalo up here, their basketball team. And one of the things that we did with them was work on what we called blind eye drills. Essentially, what that is allowing the players to shoot at the basket with their eyes closed. Now remember the second, domain, mind-body connection, more feel than vision. So that what we wanted to do was regimens where the eyes were not the necessary component. And we ended up having drills where a player would shoot three shots with his eyes open, then 3 shots with his eyes closed, then 3 shots with his eyes open. Invariably, after doing this for a couple of days, the 3 shots with the eyes open at the end, after the eyes closed, were always more accurate than the original 3 shots. So that, again, this was another thing that we put in place because of what we learned about the characteristics of the individual. Now, one of the other things, in 2016, I was on the staff of the Buffalo Bills when Rex Ryan was the coach. We were not very good. Everybody got fired. But one of the things that we did do that was good was we worked on, with the energy cycles, the timing of nutrition, adjusting for time zone differences. So that what we were able to do, because the guys were following, not all the guys, some of the guys were following the energy cycles and the timing of nutrition, we were able to adjust when they went to the West Coast so that their energy cycles and their metabolism was properly balanced. So that was one of the things that we did in football. And what's interesting is, I worked with the Minnesota Timberwolves doing this. They went to the Middle East last year for some, preseason games. We adjusted. They won all their games over there. So those are the kinds of things that the performance science allows us to do. And these are some of the validation laboratories. Okay, now a couple of other things. You probably all heard of players saying, I was playing on adrenaline. The adrenaline was going and I was right there. This is not good. Okay? Adrenaline is not helpful to performance. Adrenaline breaks the mind-body connection. When you have an adrenaline rush, what happens is that the blood vessels in your periphery constrict so that the blood flow is optimized in your core. That's why in the old days there used to be the guy whose Volkswagen went over his foot and he was able to pick it up. It was because the blood flow was in his core. It wasn't in his head either. Some people have had the experience where they fly off the handle and they get angry and they don't remember what they said. They don't remember the experience. The reason is because the adrenaline causes lack of blood flow to the brain, lack of blood flow to the peripheral muscles. So adrenaline is not helpful. There still are those discussions out there about playing on adrenaline. It's wrong. So that's one of the things that we wanted to correct in real time, and we developed something called flexion breathing. Flexion breathing. And this works even with a little bit of an adrenaline spike. Now, if you have an adrenaline spike, it takes 8 to 11 minutes, if you don't have another stimulus, for your adrenaline level to come back to normal range. Take 8 to 11 minutes. In a baseball game, if you're a pitcher, that's a long time. If you're a football player, that's a long time. So the idea was, how could we get the adrenaline level to come back to normal in the shortest amount of time? Flexion breathing, I can demonstrate it for you. It works like this. Okay, you have a spike. I'm a pitcher. I gave up a home run. My adrenaline level is high, or whatever the circumstances are. You have an adrenaline spike, and you know when it happens. Okay, first thing, take in a deep breath, and you hold it for a count of 3. While you're holding it for a count of 3, you then flex your core muscles and hold them. So you're holding your core muscles tight, and you're holding your breath. You release the core muscles over a count of 3, and then release the breath over a count of 3. You do that 3 times. Your adrenaline level goes back to normal in 30 seconds. So that if you watch some of the teams, player gives up a home run, you'll see the pitcher go back behind the mound and be standing like this. That's flexion breathing, to try to correct the effect of the adrenaline rush. And it's important, because if you're a pitcher and you lose your feel out here, that means your curveball's not going to curve. That means your sinker isn't going to sink. So that means that things are going to start spiraling negatively for you. So the flexion breathing is a real-time correction to an adrenaline rush. Now, here's another thing that we learned that was pretty interesting, and we did this based on neurological responses and things like that. And this has to do with, how do you deliver information to long-term memory when you're coaching, when you're interacting with a player? And it turns out, the first thing is that the most effective way to communicate information is with triads. 3 related things. Okay, here's the way your memory sort of works in general. I give you one piece of information. My name is George. One piece of information. It's floating around in your brain looking for a short-term hook. You know, your brain is saying, who else do I know named George? You got all that stuff going on. Okay. Then I say, my name is George, and I'm speaking at Chautauqua today. So now what happens is, my name is George goes into short-term memory, and I'm speaking at Chautauqua today is floating around inside your brain, saying, well, we heard some other guy last week, and we, this and that, that's going in there. But I say, my name is George, I'm speaking at Chautauqua today, and next week I'm speaking in Philadelphia. All 3 of those go to long-term memory. All 3 of those go to long-term memory because of it being a triad. Why it works that way, we don't know. It just does. It works that way. So triads are the best way to get things into long-term memory. The other thing that we've learned is that when you're engaging with a player and you're talking to a player about anything, 2 minutes maximum. There are not enough neural nets to handle more than 2 minutes of information, especially when you're in the middle of a game, in the middle of practice or whatever. So as coaches, we have to winnow things down so that it's real close. Now here's another thing that's really interesting. And looking across the room, most of you were around when we'd listen to music on the radio. They don't have that anymore. But we'd be listening, driving in the car, listening to music on the radio, and the song would come up that you recognize, you start singing with it. And you knew the words. You knew the words to Beatles songs and all of this kind of stuff, the Beach Boys. How'd you know the words? You didn't sit down and try to learn the words, but you knew them. How? How'd that happen? Well, here's how it happens. What happens is that the music, if it has a backbeat that's predictable, the music in the background opens up right brain delivery pathways. Okay, it opens up right brain delivery pathways, and the words come in through right brain and they get deposited in your left brain. That's why you memorize it. It's the music that opens up those pathways. So what we've started to do is having certain types of music in the background in the locker rooms, in the things, because it opens up those pathways and it's more efficient then for the coaches to be able to deliver information. I did talk about the ultradian and the circadian energy cycles. Here's something that's interesting. The energy that you're using right now is from food you've eaten over the past 3 days. And I remember my mother saying, you got to have a good breakfast this morning so you're sharp. But it doesn't work that way. It takes about 72 hours for ready energy to be metabolized and stored as glycogen in lean muscle. Your ready energy is stored as glycogen in lean muscle, and it takes about 72 hours for that to happen. Now, the key then is to be able to open those energy gates when you need it, and you can do that with, blood glucose and that type of thing. Having some orange juice opens up the energy gates. But the key is that your ready energy, the energy you need to play today, is stored as glycogen in your lean muscle, not in your big muscle, but in your lean muscle, and you have enough ready energy for 72 hours. It takes 72 hours, you have enough ready energy for 72 hours. If you fast, for example, you're taking away access to your ready energy. And if you fast for 3 days, now what happens is you're going into your survival energy, which is stored as glycogen in your liver. So that goes back to the reasoning why we have this, the idea of staying with your circadian and ultradian rhythms in terms of timing of nutrition. We need to have regular input. And for athletes, that's critically important for readiness, recovery, and resiliency. Here's another thing. We make melatonin when we go into deep sleep. Melatonin is a hormone. It's a repair and recovery hormone. It's a 4-stage antioxidant, meaning the molecule breaks down a free radical. What's left breaks down a free radical. What's left breaks down another free radical. What's left breaks down another free radical. That's the melatonin that your body makes. Every one of us is an individual. Our body makes melatonin that's individualized to us. The amount of melatonin that we make while we're in deep sleep, while we're sleeping, determines the amount of serotonin we have the next day. The reason is because both melatonin and serotonin come from the essential amino acid called L-tryptophan. So that what happens is that the amount of melatonin we make determines the amount of serotonin we make. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. I mean, you've heard about serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Serotonin is something that helps with anxiety, all kinds of things like that. It also, for an athlete, is quickness, alertness, strength, all of that stuff. So this underscores how important it is to get into deep sleep, at night. Now, getting into deep sleep is a key. Now, one other thing that I'll say is that a lot of people take melatonin to help them sleep. And it's a little bit of a misnomer. It doesn't really work that way. Because when you take external melatonin, it suppresses your body's ability to make your own melatonin. Now, sometime, if you have jet lag or something like that and you need to get back on track, taking some melatonin might help there. But on a regular basis, taking melatonin is not healthy in terms of the functioning of the 4-stage antioxidant melatonin and making the serotonin for the next day. Now, the other thing, I'm not going to go through this stuff. I'm going to do this. Okay, look, this is something, you know, and again, I'm going into a whole other area, and I'll answer any questions you have. But this here, look, everybody in baseball, for example, and in football and all sports are going into this analytic stuff. This here is a formula for spin and axis angle on a curveball. What do you do with that information? As an athlete, as a coach, what do you do? And the thing is that from a it's an interesting discussion point, you know, if you can figure out the formula. But the point is that analytic data about what's happened in the past focuses on what's happened in the past. It does not predict what's going to happen in the future. It does not predict what's going to happen with the next play that comes in your direction in a game. So it's very important to understand that analytics is sort of information, like nowadays with AI, there's so much information, it's ridiculous. Some of it's right and some of it's not. But the point is that, 5 minutes, that's it, okay. But the point is that what we need to do is understand that our parasympathetic nervous system is what allows us to make those instinctive changes in the heat of the game that are the right changes. I'm not going to go through this other stuff because I'm out of time. So let me stop there. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry I went a little bit over. But questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Because we tape these talks and we want to let people know what the questions were, the Q&A period. We had this terrible era of steroids in baseball. Even today, you get players saying, just give me a pill. All this is too much work for me. I want a magic pill.
So you want a magic? Yeah, I mean.
Does that still happen?
It still happens, but in baseball and football, there are rules now. They, at random, will come in and take urine tests and whatever to test guys are trying to suppress all of that. But the other thing is that information about how counterproductive steroids are for players is now being used as part of spring training. There are sessions, there are doctors coming in talking about it. So what we're trying to do is educate the players and the coaches so that the magic pill era hopefully is going away. It's a big job because that was easy for a lot of players, but we're getting there.
I have two questions. The first question was, does most of this apply to women as well as men performance? And then secondly, I was under the impression that people are either right brain or left brain dominant, and I don't know how you switch them.
Okay, good. Both of them are great questions. The answer with regard to, does this apply to women and men? It applies equally to women and men, except from an energy point of view, women who are still menstruating. So there have to be adjustments made in terms of timing of nutrition and things like that. But for the most part, it applies. Now, the other thing that is important is that we want to do as much evaluation of the individual as we can. Everybody's different. So we're trying to customize to the individual as much as possible, whether it's man, woman, child, whatever. Okay, so that's important. With regard to left brain, right brain dominance and all that stuff, okay, here's the way it works. If you look at sort of development, if you can look at your kids or your grandkids, okay, when a child is first born, he's right brain dominant because he's exploring everything in the area. And then, you know, at about a year of age or so, what happens is they start stacking things up, left brain starting to work. Then all of a sudden, you know, 6 months later, they start writing on the wall, right brain. So what happens is that brain dominance changes based on the experience. This is one of those epigenetic triggers that is changeable, and that's what's important. You're not stuck in either left brain dominance or right brain dominance, you can alter that. And that was one of the big findings from the Human Genome Project.
George, in listening to you, it seems some other factors that are important are time and money. And as you're working with athletes and you're working with teams, if you do things that make them use their instincts and they're very intense and they can get better right away and they can make the ball spin more and they can throw it harder, but maybe they'll only last 3 years doing it that way. And 6 years, if they weren't taught to do that, who can you talk to try to change behavior that's in the best long-term interests of the players?
That's a great point. Now, with regard to pitchers in baseball, last year there was a huge study done by Major League Baseball with a lot of performance coaches and others involved, looking at the ulnar, the Tommy John injury. And the interesting thing about that is that nobody wanted to take the blame for it, And the report came out and said, well, it has to do with what they're making young kids at 12 years old do. Inadequate response, not the right response. We have a lot more work to do. But it's critically important to understand that pushing young people beyond their physiological limits for the purpose of having more spin is counterproductive. It hurts their careers, it shortens their careers, and we have a lot of work yet to do in that area.
I've heard if you take three groups of people who have never played basketball, and you take the first group and you say, go home, take the second group and you say, go out for a week and every day shoot 100 foul shots, and you take the other group and say, don't shoot the foul shots, but go home and in your mind, think of 100 shots. And the story I heard was, of course, the first group that did nothing, they were terrible, and the second two groups were equal, just by visualizing as they went to sleep what to do as opposed to actually shooting. Are you familiar with that? Or?
I'm familiar with that study. It has, some parts of it have been validated, some parts of it have been debunked. It was a college group that did the experiment. Here's just a couple of things. The first thing is that you have to combine the body with the mind stuff. You can't do it only with the mind, because you shoot the shot with your body. The other thing is that the 100 shots is too many. After about 6 repetitions, when you're trying to develop a new skill, after about 6 repetitions, there's what's called attenuation, which means you can't learn anymore. You have to take a break, do something different, and then come back and do 6 more. Like, for example, what we've done with a lot of teams that I've worked with is in batting practice, for example. They used to do 15, 20 swings. Now they do 6. So that that was a loaded question. There are a whole bunch of pieces in there that we're having to validate and work on. But for the most part, if you have the skill and then you conceptualize what is going to happen with the skill, it reinforces the skill. But you have to have the skill first, so that the people coming off the street shooting free throws, they don't have a chance. They have to learn the skill first. Yes?
I'm curious if you have any comments on pitching and arm slot. I've noticed that younger pitching coaches encourage young players to find what's comfortable for them in terms of arm slot, and then they go to their older coaches like, oh, no, over the top or go home.
Well, the thing is, again, it's a great question, because every player is different. Every young person is different. Young people are growing. They might look different at 8 as they do at 12. Look at this. I didn't look this way, in high school. So we change. And that's why it's important. The idea of finding a comfortable arm slot makes sense. with the idea that there's no one size fits all, and it might change. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to teach coaches. See, there's a thing, you know, in baseball, football, or whatever, you know, the old timers are, oh, this is the way we did it, and that's the way it's got to be. Well, it's not that way. And that's what we have to be working on, especially with the young kids. We have to customize to them based on their body type, based on their strength, based on their age, based on where they are in development, based on the type of practicing they do. Do they lift weights? Do they stretch? All of that stuff is important. So customization is a key.
Oxygen extraction fraction was a popular muscle extraction fraction of oxygen. It was popular in the Tour de Force. I can't remember the biker that was corrupted over there doing that. Did you use oxygen extraction fractions for muscle? And if you did, was it predictive?
Well, I was always against any type of physical intervention with the players. Okay. So I did not participate in anything that had to do with drawing, you know, oxygen extraction, none of that, because, you know, our science tells us that we want to be able to adapt the individual based on the limits of their body type, age, and all of those things. So I can't give you more information than that. I stayed away from it. Okay, there's one more.
This is just a follow-up, George. You mentioned this interval that's needed for additional accomplishment. I assume that happens I know from my own experience as a musician, I can try things and then I got to stop. And then all of a sudden when I come back, all of a sudden I can do that part of the piece or that chord or something like that. What is that interval?
It depends on what the skill is. But for the most part, think of it like this. With the epigenetic triggering, you're manipulating a cell, but it's carried forward in the daughter cells. So that the cell that you're manipulating, you're not going to hold it. It's the daughter cells. Most of the cells in our body, we have trillions of cells in our body. Most of the cells in our body that have to do with mind-body connection and performance turn over every 6 months. And the science is saying that for a change to be permanent, you know, doing something in baseball, football, or whatever, you need about 3 cell turnovers. So permanency requires working on that for about 18 months.
We're a little older than the professional baseball players, and let's say we learned to ride the bike, and we're now having trouble still riding the bike. What can we do as older people to try and learn from some of the things you've learned?
Well, one of the things is the energy cycle timing, the timing of nutrition. And if you want, we actually have an app that will give you push notices on the timing of nutrition. Bob can give you my number or my email address, and I'll send it to you. I'll send you a download code for it. So that will give you a push notice, time for liquid nutrition, time for chewable nutrition. That's the most important thing we can do at our age, is make sure that our energy cycles are in line, they're reset, so that we are able to be ready for what we're going to do during the day, we can recover at night, and then be resilient for the rest of our days.
Thank you very much. You were resilient. Thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you and your friends and your family next week. And the donation basket is on the table outside. And I'm sure George would be happy to talk to you if you have a question.